Long before the age of written history, in a world where gods walked among mortals and monsters lurked at the edges of every map, the ancient Greeks told a story so powerful that it has survived for nearly 3,000 years. A story of pride, punishment, courage, and destiny, centered on three unforgettable figures. Medusa, the woman whose gaze turned men to stone; Perseus, the demigod hero fated to slay her; and Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war who set the entire chain of events into motion. And to understand this myth, we must first travel back to a time before Medusa became a monster, when, according to the poet Ovid, she was said to have once been a stunningly beautiful young priestess, famous above all for her long, flowing hair, and it was this very beauty that drew the attention of Poseidon, god of the sea, who pursued her inside the sacred temple of Athena itself, a violation of the goddess's holiest ground. And when Athena discovered what had happened within her own temple, her fury fell not upon Poseidon, a fellow Olympian she could not easily punish, but upon Medusa herself, and in her rage the goddess transformed Medusa's beautiful hair into a writhing mass of venomous serpents and cursed her, so that any living creature who looked directly into her eyes would instantly turn to solid stone. Cast out and transformed into a monster, Medusa fled to a remote, rocky island alongside her two sisters, Stheno and Euryale, who were immortal Gorgons themselves, though only Medusa, the youngest, was mortal. And there, in isolation, she lived out her days as a creature of horror, her very presence turning unfortunate travelers and would-be heroes into statues frozen in their final moment of terror, her lair slowly filling with the stone likenesses of men who had dared to seek her out. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Argos, a prophecy was setting into motion the second half of our story. King Acrisius of Argos consulted an oracle, and the answer he received filled him with dread. A grandson born to his daughter Danae would one day grow up to kill him. Desperate to escape his fate, Acrisius locked his daughter Danae away in a bronze underground chamber, sealed from all human contact, believing this would prevent her from ever bearing a child. But Zeus, king of the gods, was not so easily thwarted, and he came to Danae in the form of a shower of golden light, and from this divine union a son was born, a boy named Perseus. When Acrisius discovered that his daughter had given birth despite his precautions, he refused to kill her and the infant outright, fearing the wrath of the gods for such bloodshed, and instead he sealed mother and child inside a wooden chest and cast them into the open sea, leaving their survival to fate itself. The chest drifted across the waves until it washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys discovered them and took them in, raising Perseus as his own in safety, far from his grandfather's schemes. Years passed, and Perseus grew into a strong and courageous young man, but trouble found him once again through Dictys' brother, King Polydectes, the ruler of the island, who had grown obsessed with Danae and wished to marry her against her will, seeing the now-grown Perseus as the only obstacle standing in his way. Polydectes devised a cunning trap. He announced a grand feast at which every guest was expected to bring an expensive gift, and knowing Perseus had no wealth to offer, the king publicly demanded that Perseus instead bring him something far more dangerous: the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze meant certain death, a task Polydectes fully expected would be Perseus's doom. Rather than back down, Perseus accepted the challenge, and this rash vow set him on the path toward the most dangerous quest in Greek mythology. But he was not entirely alone, for the gods themselves took an interest in his fate. Athena, who had never forgiven Medusa, and who saw in Perseus a chance to see her curse fulfilled through righteous heroism, appeared to guide him, along with Hermes, the swift messenger god, and together they equipped him with extraordinary gifts. Hermes provided a pair of winged sandals that granted the power of flight, along with an adamantine sword, one of the few weapons capable of cutting through the Gorgon's famously impenetrable scales. Hades, god of the underworld, lent Perseus his helm of invisibility, a helmet capable of hiding its wearer from any eye, mortal or divine, and Athena herself gave Perseus a polished bronze shield, brilliant enough to serve as a mirror, and it was this final gift that would ultimately allow Perseus to succeed where countless others had failed, for the goddess instructed him never to look at Medusa directly, but only at her reflection in the shield's polished surface, so that her deadly gaze could never fall upon him. Before Perseus could even reach Medusa's lair, however, he first needed to learn its exact location, a secret known only to three ancient sisters called the Grii, gray-haired hags who had been born old, and who shared a single eye and a single tooth between the three of them, passing the eye from hand to hand whenever one of them wished to see. Perseus, ever resourceful, waited for the precise moment when the sisters were exchanging the eye between them, and in that instant he snatched it from their grasp, holding it hostage and refusing to return it until they revealed the location of the Gorgon's island and the path to the nymphs who guarded the magical gifts he still needed. With the location finally known, Perseus flew across the sea on his winged sandals until he reached the desolate, stone-littered island where Medusa and her sisters lived, a landscape scattered with the petrified remains of every hero who had come before him and failed. Wearing the helm of invisibility to move unseen, and carrying Athena's polished shield before him like a mirror, Perseus crept toward the sleeping Gorgons, watching Medusa's reflection rather than her true form, and when he was close enough, he struck with Hermes' sword, severing her head in a single powerful blow, and from the wound, in one of mythology's strangest and most striking details, sprang two remarkable offspring conceived earlier with Poseidon, Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant warrior wielding a golden sword, both bursting forth fully formed from Medusa's severed neck in that same instant. Perseus quickly sealed the still lethal head inside a special pouch, known as a cabesus, careful never to let its gaze fall upon any living thing, and as he made his escape, Medusa's two immortal sisters awoke and gave chase, screaming in fury across the island, but Perseus, protected by Hades' helm of invisibility, vanished from their sight and soared away across the sky unharmed. His journey home was far from over, and along the way Perseus encountered further trials that would cement his place among the greatest heroes of Greek legend. Flying over the deserts of North Africa, drops of Medusa's blood are said to have fallen from the pouch, and according to legend these drops gave rise to the venomous serpents that populate the Libyan desert to this day. Continuing onward, Perseus arrived in the kingdom of the Titan Atlas, who upon hearing that Perseus was a son of Zeus, refused him hospitality out of an old prophecy warning that a son of Zeus would one day steal the golden apples guarded in his domain. Angered by this hostile refusal, Perseus unveiled Medusa's head, and Atlas was instantly turned to solid stone, his massive form becoming the Atlas Mountains that still bear his name along the northern edge of Africa. Perseus's next stop brought him to the kingdom of Ethiopia, ruled by King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, whose boastful claim that her own beauty surpassed that of the sea nymphs had provoked Poseidon's anger, leading the god to send a monstrous sea creature to ravage their coastline. The only way to appease Poseidon, an oracle declared, was to chain the royal couple's daughter, the beautiful princess Andromeda, to a rock by the sea as a sacrifice to the beast. Perseus arrived just as the monster rose from the waves to devour her, and in a dramatic battle he used Medusa's severed head to turn the sea monster to stone, saving Andromeda's life and instantly falling in love with her. The two were soon married, and Andromeda would later bear him several children, becoming a central figure in his story rather than a mere rescued bystander. With his bride at his side, Perseus finally returned to Seriphos, only to discover that his mother Danae had been forced into hiding at a temple altar to escape the continued advances of the tyrannical king Polydectes, who had assumed Perseus would never return alive from his quest. Furious at the treatment of his mother, Perseus confronted Polydectes and his court directly, and when the king mocked him and demanded proof of his supposed victory, Perseus unveiled Medusa's head one final time, turning the cruel king and his entire assembled court to stone in an instant, ending the tyranny that had plagued his family for years. Having rescued his mother and settled matters on Seriphos, Perseus fulfilled his debts to the gods, returning Hades' helm, Hermes' sandals and sword, and finally presenting Medusa's head to Athena herself, who mounted it upon her own shield, the Aegis, where it would continue to serve as a symbol of protection and a warning to her enemies for the rest of mythological history. Yet the story could not conclude without confronting the prophecy that had shaped Perseus's entire life from birth, the warning that he would one day kill his own grandfather, King Acrisius. Years later, while participating in athletic games held in another kingdom, Perseus threw a discus that veered off course, carried by a sudden gust of wind, striking an elderly spectator in the crowd and killing him instantly. And that spectator, by cruel and inescapable fate, turned out to be Acrisius himself, who had fled Argos in fear of the very prophecy that ultimately found him regardless, proving, as so many Greek myths do, that fate cannot be outrun no matter how far one travels or how carefully one plans. Devastated and unwilling to claim the throne of a kingdom he had inadvertently inherited through his grandfather's death, Perseus arranged to trade kingdoms with a neighboring ruler, taking the throne of Tiryns instead, where he and Andromeda are said to have founded the great city of Mycenae, ruling together for the rest of their lives and becoming, according to legend, the ancestors of an entire line of legendary heroes, including Heracles himself. When Perseus and Andromeda eventually died, the gods honored their extraordinary lives by placing them among the stars, and to this day their constellations, along with those of Cepheus, Cassiopeia, and the sea monster Cetus, can still be seen in the night sky, forever locked in the same celestial drama that once played out on the shores of ancient Ethiopia. Looking back at this myth today, it becomes clear why the tale of Medusa, Perseus, and Athena has endured for nearly 3 millennia. It is a story layered with meaning far beyond monsters and magic swords. It explores the terrifying randomness of divine punishment through Medusa's tragic transformation from victim to monster. It captures the anxiety of prophecy and the impossibility of escaping fate through Acrisius's doomed attempts to avoid his own death. And it celebrates courage, cleverness, and humility through Perseus, a hero who succeeds not through brute strength alone but through wit, patience, and the wisdom of the gifts entrusted to him. Using a mirror rather than his own eyes, using invisibility rather than open confrontation, and using divine assistance rather than pure ego. Even today, the image of Medusa's serpent-haired head remains one of the most recognizable symbols in Western art and culture, appearing in ancient temple carvings meant to ward off evil, in Renaissance paintings and sculptures, and in modern fashion, film, and literature, a symbol that has shifted over centuries from pure monster to, in more recent retellings, a tragic figure whose punishment for another's crime raises timeless questions about justice, blame, and the price so often paid by the powerless when the powerful commit their sins in sacred places. And it is this enduring emotional complexity, wrapped inside an unforgettable adventure of monsters, gods, and heroes, that ensures the myth of Medusa, Perseus, and Athena will continue to be told and retold for generations still to come.